Welcome back to my series where I help you build decks so good that it feels like cheating. You ask the frog for help and he helps you make your decks better, more consistent, and more fun. If you're ready for elementals to finally supplant dragons and dinosaurs as a superior creature type, then stick around because today we're looking at what is likely the most powerful and, if you're into combos, most fun commander from Lorwyn Eclipsed in Ashling the Limitless. I'm going to give you both a budget and an upgraded list at the end, and along the way you'll learn how I think as I teach you all about deck building from my 30 years of Magic experience. You should leave with more knowledge to help you perfect your own decks in just the way that you want them. You know, give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish and all of that. I am also doing a giveaway for a base deck department version of this Ashling deck, so keep an eye out for that a little bit later. But first, just in case you haven't seen her yet, Ashling is a 2/3 elemental sorcerer for 3 mana. Her first ability is that she gives elementals in our hand evoke 4, meaning we can cast any elemental for 4 colorless mana, but we have to sacrifice them when they enter. Her second ability covers up this sacrificial gap by creating a token that's a copy of any non-token elemental that we sacrifice. At the beginning of our end step though, we need to sacrifice that token unless we play Wooburg. If you haven't already seen the line here, Ashling can enable some pretty wild things. And because of that power she's packing, I'm honestly surprised that she is the commander of a precon. That said, the precon is quite understandably missing the pieces to make her broken, but that's where this trusty frog PNG on YouTube comes in. The brief that I received for this deck was pretty broad. It was a commission on coffee for an Ashling deck built from scratch. Other than a deck that's either bracket 2 or bracket 3 and that's focused on cheating and cheaper evoked elementals, it was a blank canvas. You might think that I, as a deck building addict, would love nothing more than freedom to build whatever I like, but you'd be wrong. This honestly makes things so much more challenging. Normally when I get a brief for a deck review or build, I get a ton of input. Partially because I ask questions like, what do you want your deck to do, and what do you want your general game plan to be? How do you want the deck to win, and which key cards or types of cards do you want to use? What do you not want the deck to be, or why are you struggling that's made you look for help? The answers to these questions, even if we are asking ourselves in a deck building process, should yield a much clearer direction of where we're trying to go. And having a more clear direction and knowing what to aim for makes the mechanics of building a deck that gets there so much easier. But in this case with a blank canvas, it put me in the situation that I imagine most newer players find themselves in all the time, which is having tons of choices and not knowing which to pursue. In this state of confusion, I like to start this process by looking at the commander and envisaging that endgame board state, or how I'm hoping to win, and working backwards. Everything in my deck should in some way facilitate that. I don't like to look at other sources of information like EDHREC before I start cooking, because that's likely to hinder me from coming up with something original, or it may lead me down the wrong path. In this instance with Ashling, the first cards that came to mind were using a combination of Urza's Incubator and Semblance Anvil to make our elemental evoke cost 0. My next thought was that if we paired this with something like a Beast Whisperer that allows us to draw a card on a free evoke of our elementals, it should allow us to cast a whole lot of elementals and then swing out to win the game because of the hasty tokens left behind. If we get this combination in play, our only limitation is basically whether we can chain enough elementals. Now I imagine this is probably the standard place that most people end up, as Ashling's designs definitely pushes us in that direction. The alternative though is a grindy mid-range game plan of incremental value, evoking an elemental or 2 per turn and having engines that bring them back so that we can recycle them over and over and over for more value. Pairing our elementals with cards like Merrin, Oversold Cemetery, or Rivetier's Ascendancy. This could be a decent game plan and probably better for lower power than what I was planning, but I feel that Ashling is going to get heavily targeted regardless of what we do, because even in this grindier deck, we're still going to want the cost reducers and the card draw engines, so we're better off being the problem that we're perceived to be. Because if Ashling gets removed and we're trying to hardcast elementals from our deck, our game and our deck are straight up going to suck. Naturally, this kind of deck will want elementals that have powerful abilities, and that do things like deal damage or pump up all of our creatures like Jubilation. Any ability or effect that we want, be that removal or card draw, is better strapped to an elemental than it is on a separate card. To start building a deck, I'll approach this by going through all the elementals, starting with the most expensive mana cost wise and working backwards. Given we're cheating them in, the mana cost is irrelevant, and typically the more expensive a card is, the more powerful it is and its abilities are. I'll then do the same thing with shapeshifters. Then, if I think about what the deck is going to want outside of creatures, it's going to want the cost reducers, the card draw engines, protection for Ashling, potentially some interaction or removal, and maybe a little bit of extra combat or reanimation if we have space. If I had to visualize this on one of my trusty character sheets, it'll look a little bit like this, and I'll link to that and the other key tools that I use like my 33 card deck down in the description below the like button. Searching for elementals would be super simple, as all I would need to do is go to Scryfall and filter by creature type, then use my eyes. I'm going to want the elementals that have great enters or dies abilities to make use of that evoke synergy. To get the good cost reducers, I'll take what we know and use similar wording, looking for things like spells you cast paired with less to cast. To find out draw engines, I'll look up cards that say things like whenever you cast, and trawl through what that brings up to find the ones that give us card draw. Now before we start talking about individual cards in detail, a big consideration here is what color our mana base is, because technically our mana base could be mono red. That said, the non-elemental cards that we need will inform which colors we need in the deck, and we'll find out by looking at our shortlisted cards. And I often find that once I start searching for cards, the ones that I find will often tweak and change my perspective and plans, so let's look at how we went. There were a lot of viable elementals and shapeshifters, 79 on my shortlist to be exact, so that's far more than we need. I'll talk about specific elementals when I look at the finished product, but I will call out a few key thoughts. The first is that elementals that pump our board or deal damage are going to be highly prioritized. If we can string together 15 elementals, and they each get +4/+4, that's 60 player damage and is likely enough to end the game when added to the base power of all of our elementals. Jubilation is a great example of an effect like this, as is Enraged Flamecaster. The second thought is that any elementals that can replace themselves or draw us cards and thereby replace themselves are probably our biggest priority. If we use the above example of +4/+4 buffs, any free elemental that we get gets us that much closer to a win. An Eclipsed Flamekin will therefore be very good. A Risen Reef or Regal Force will be very, very good. Lastly, I am in no way bothered whether an elemental has an evoke cost by itself. My plan is for Ashling to be alive at all times. In a deck like this, other players may want backup plans and ways for the deck to work and win if their commander isn't in play, but that's not how I think. Every decision we make has trade-offs, and that hedging strategy will see us playing many inferior elementals and overall decreasing the power and fun of what we're trying to do a lot because we have to drop the mana curve and facilitate a game plan that doesn't rely on Ashling. It's my view that it's far better to plan to keep her alive with a high risk and high reward game plan than plan for her not to be alive. I'd rather have a high risk game plan that's an absolute banger when it works, rather than one that's mid, both in terms of power and fun, but does that every game. Speaking of power and fun, you can have both if you subscribe to the internet's #1 magic frog. I cook up videos like this that help you think differently about Commander. Videos that will help you build better decks, play better, and ultimately have more fun. If you want more of that, like the video to tell the algorithm that you think it's good, and subscribe to make sure that my next banger gets delivered directly into your eyeballs. Moving beyond the elementals, I started to look at cost reducers. There are a ton of options, but my priority is cost reducers that can cut mana costs by 2 or ideally even more. Obviously, I've already mentioned both Urza's Incubator and Semblance Anvil, which in combination allow us to have free evoke casts, but there are some other absolute banger possibilities. I can't not mention Animar, who can do all of our cost reduction heavy lifting by himself with a little bit of work, and he's an elemental. There are also a number of situational cost reducers, things like Goblin and Archomancer, Emerald Medallion, or Hazoret's Monument. These could all work if we limit the colors of our elementals to certain colors, but I don't love that limitation. I do like Hazoret's Monument as it both reduces cost and can loot for us, and I am a huge fan of cards that do 2 things that we want, but I don't think the cards that reduce cost by 1 are good enough in this deck. Something like Goreclaw, however, is a great example of what we do want and can be a 2-cost reducer for creatures with power 4 or greater. So a great inclusion, but we need to be aware that most of our elementals then have to have 4 or more power. Heartless Summoning and Sipsig Ceremony are both absolutely great here, but that would mean we need to run black mana in our deck, and a lot of black mana in the case of the Ceremony. And I'm not sure I want to be running black mana because I'm leaning towards a Teemo color combination, so we'll have to see. Which combination of cost reducers we end up with will pair with and align with what elementals we choose, as we'll intentionally need to build around either high mana cost, high power, or both, which fortunately is something that we probably want anyway, but we'll see. Let's look at card draw engines. When I first started, my thought was obviously something like Beast Whisperer, triggering off casts, or maybe Lifecrafter's Bestiary, but then we would need to pay mana, and I don't think that's going to work. There are a bunch of other similar cards that we can use, things like Vanquish's Banner or Chronicle of Victory, but I don't really like their mana costs. There's a bunch more that draw on cast, like Eshki Teemer's Roar, Helga's Skittish Seer, Up the Beanstalk, and Song of Creation, with the latter probably being the strongest from a pure draw perspective, but with many of these having some kind of power or mana cost trigger. As I was searching though, I realized that Garruk's Uprising and cards like Elemental Bond are much better, as they trigger off the evoke cast entering and they trigger off the token entering, so that's 2 cards per elemental. When it comes to protection, we'll need to be prepared to deal with threats that target both creature and non-creature permanents because our enchantments and artifacts are as important as our commander. Counterspells like Negate are probably the best option here, but cards like Defend the Rider and Tamir's Safekeeping can also work very well. Now, given we are a combo deck, one thing we're definitely going to need is Tutors, because we won't have enough of the key cards that we want, like Urza's Incubator. Similar to choosing our elementals based on how they fit with our card draw engines and cost reducers, Tutors are going to need to be chosen based on how well they fetch exactly what we need. Cards like Fabricate can get us our artifacts, and cards like Fauna Shaman can get us our creatures. With a large budget, we could expand into black and white, but I fear we're going to be adding a lot of complexity, especially in a budget list with nowhere near enough payoff, but we'll see where we land. With all of this in mind, I now start pulling together a basic V1 deck, so I can do some early testing. Because I need to understand whether my vision of the endgame state I wanted to reach and how I planned to get there was realistic. Fortunately, it was, but while the deck was definitely doing the thing, and doing some absolutely ludicrous stuff, I had a problem. I had almost no turn 1 or 2 plays, and this felt very bad to pilot. So this now became a problem that I had to solve. The likely best answer was 1 cost ramp, because that launches me straight into my 3 mana cost slot on turn 2, and our most important spells in the deck all cost 3 mana. So I made this change, took out a bunch of stuff, and fit in as much ramp as I possibly could, and it felt very good. Beyond this, I made some very minor changes to the deck, particularly locking in my colors, which impacted which tutors I could and couldn't run. And I made a bunch of minor tweaks since, and I think there are still some minor tweaks to be made, but let's look at where I landed. What I've ended up with is very much a combo deck. The early turns are all about setup to assemble our combo, and when we do, we can basically play out our entire deck and win. But how do we win? Well, we'll get there in just a second. As I mentioned earlier before I started building, I think there are 2 major directions that this deck can go. One is a more slower, grindy version that evokes 1 to 2 elementals a turn and uses graveyard synergies and reanimation to gain value and win over a bunch of turns. The other version is this, a combo-focused list. Don't get me wrong, this deck can do that incremental thing, and we often have to if we only have 1 cost reducer. But Ashling is going to be seen as a massive problem anytime she's on the board, and having goldfished the deck a whole bunch of times, I have little to no faith that there's a feasible deck that can be built that can operate without Ashling facilitating it. That is why I ended up on this specific combo list. Our goal is to assemble our commander, 2 cost reducers, and at least 1 draw engine. This 4-card combination allows us to evoke most of our elementals for free, each drawing us at least 2 cards, and the goal is that we chain elementals together to play out our entire library or as much of it as we need. We win the game by either attacking with lots of hasty elemental tokens, pumped up by creatures like Rumbleweed and Jubilation, or by burning our opponents with cast triggers from Eshki or Champion of the Path. So let's look at which cards actually ended up in the deck and why they're cool. Starting with the cost reducers, you already know about Urza's Incubator, Semblance Anvil, and Animar. Next we have Krosan Drover, who reduces the mana cost of all creatures that cost 6 or more mana by 2 colorless mana. Goreclaw does the same thing, but for creatures with 4 or more power. Teemo Battlecry reduces spells cost by 1 colorless mana for each creature that we have in play with 4 or more power, which is 1 to begin with, but can very easily be 2 and even up to 4 or more. And lastly, Gwenna taps for 2 mana, but untaps whenever we cast the creature spell with power 5 or greater, so effectively reduces all of our creature costs by 2. Next, let's look at our card draw engines. We basically want as many copies of Garruk's Uprising as we can get. Things like Elemental Bond, Kavu Lair, Kiora, Outcast the Trailblazer, and Temur Ascendancy are all effectively doing what we want. Souls of the Harvest is a little bit worse, only triggering on non-token creatures entering, but meets our criteria for a big, free, card-generating elemental. Eshki only draws on cast, but importantly can act as a burn win condition. Greater Good is really good here, as most of our elementals are big with 5 or more power. We can sacrifice our elementals in response to the evoke trigger on the stack, so each will likely dig 5 cards deep and net us 2 or more cards. We can then also do the same thing with the token that's left behind in a pinch, and that's crazy card advantage when we've done that with a few elementals. Our ramp is super simple, just a bunch of little dorks, so I won't spend much time there. Equally, our protection spells are pretty simple, Ideally 1 to 2 mana spells that either likely stop a removal spell aimed at Ashling, one of our key artifacts or enchantments, or counter spells. Our tutors are a little bit more interesting. Trophy Mage, Scour for Scrap, and Fabricate both fetch us our artifacts. Imperial Recruiter can get Eshki or Risen Reef as card draw engines, or Animar, Gwen, or Krosan Dover for cost reduction. Time of Need can fetch Eshki, Animar, Gorklaw, or Gwenna. And Fauna Shaman, Celestial Reunion, Nature's Rhythm, or Formidable Speaker hit all of our creature targets that have already been mentioned, as well as Team of Battlecry. Okay, this is a lot, but it's all been foreplay because you're here for elementals. So let's look at these fine specimens. Given our combo pieces that rely on mana cost or power, an elemental ideally needs to cost 6 or more mana and have 5 or more power to meet all of our criteria. There are a few exceptions, one of which is Twin Flame Travelers as it doubles our triggers, and doubling is absolutely broken. But Avenger of Zendikar creates a bunch of small guys, and given one of our 2 paths to winning is sending a wide board of pumped guys at our enemies, getting on average 10 extra bodies from the Avenger is pretty damn good. Belonging is the same, but different. And Champion of the Path is one of our most important cards and strongest non-combat win con. Gravesifter is possibly my favorite synergistic card in the deck and broken with a capital B. On a combo turn, we fill our graveyard with tons of elementals. The Sifter allows us to return them and play them all again, and given he creates a token copy, when he dies, we can use the copy to return the original to our hand and cast all of those elementals as well as the Sifter as many times as we want. Green Warden of Marasa allows us to get other important cards like our combo pieces back from the graveyard in a pinch, and Muldrotha does much the same. Hulking Metamorph is a big copy spell, and given some of the great effects that some of our other elementals have, copying is pretty broken. Quicksilver Gargantuan and Sakashima's Protege are much the same, but the Protege also cascades for 6. Interdisciplinary Mascot allows us to dig 8 cards into our library, keeping 2. Which is great when trying to string elementals together, or for digging for our combo pieces if we only have one cost reducer in play. You already know about Jubilation and Rumbleweed, but they pump our board by +4/+4 or +6/6 and give Trample, which is wild combat power. Maelstrom Wanderer cascades for 8 twice, which will hit most of our elementals, and gives all of our creatures haste, which is really important to give all of our tokens that we create with Avenger of Zendikar haste so that they can attack. Massive Mysteries can give a creature Myriad, which can do all sorts of silly things, but the primary use is to buff our board via extra Jubilation triggers. Null Drifter is simply here to give us extra card draw, and Nyxbloom Ancient is here to give us a lot more mana. Regal Force can draw a lot of cards. Most of the time I've had at least 2 other green creatures in play when I cast this near the start of a combo, and Regal Force draws 6 cards by himself. We've already talked about Souls of the Harvest, and Sunderflock bounces all non-elemental creatures, opening the way for us to end the game without having to deal with blockers. Last but definitely not least, Titan of Industry is primarily here as a way to deal with problematic artifacts or enchantments that could stop us from winning. Hopefully you found as much joy in these cool elementals as I did, but now let's take a look at how we turn them into a win. An ideal opening hand has at least 3 sources of mana, a source of ramp, a source of protection, and any and all combo pieces. We have enough elementals that we should draw into one, so they're not critical to have in our opening hand. Our ideal mana curve is a turn 1 land into a ramp source. That way on turn 2 we can cast a tutor or a combo piece. Turns 3 to 5 are usually the same thing in different variations so that we can start trying to dig into our library, evoking elementals by around turn 6. If we have our card draw engines out, evoking an elemental or 2 per turn and holding up mana for protection is how we dig for our second cost reducer. If we find it, we won't typically have mana to play with protection up, and we'll need to wait an extra turn to do that so we can try to win. It's absolutely fine to sacrifice a whole bunch of elementals doing this because Gravesifter will bring them all back when we combo out. If you decide to build this deck, you're going to need to combo out a few times to learn the different lines that the deck is capable of, and I advise that you goldfish so that you are much more comfortable when playing the deck with your friends. That's because watching this deck combo out, like any combo deck, isn't necessarily the most engaging thing to do when the person who's piloting it is fumbling around. And your friends will almost certainly ask whether you can actually win, and you'll need to be able to explain how you likely can. This will often involve you getting about 20% of the way through your combo and having them go, "Ah, yes, I see. Okay, we're cooked, let's go again." Assuming you've got your combo pieces in play, the primary early goal is to chain together enough elementals, and once you have about 5 in hand, you pretty much can't whiff anymore. Some of the key cards you're going to want to look for to actually win are things like Temur Ascendancy or Maelstrom Wanderer to give haste to all the tokens you're going to create with Belonging and Avenger of Zendikar. You already know about Jubilation and Rumbleweed and Eshki and Champion of the Path, with the former facilitating a combat win con even if you don't get all the token generators because of how big they'll make your elementals, and the latter, especially in Champion of the Path, churning out tons of non-combat damage. Depending which elementals you're served as you start comboing, it'll determine whether you're building to a combat or burn win con. For example, if you hit a Champion of the Path early, you'll only need to be able to evoke 4 to 5 elementals before you win. If you don't, you need around 10 or more elementals before you likely have lethal combat damage, and that's assuming you hit a Rumbleweed or Jubilation or a Sunderfolk to render blockers irrelevant. The main other thing to be aware of is how cards like Twin Flame Travelers or Gravesifter engage with all your elementals, their triggers, and how copy spells can engage with all of these effects. For example, Gravesifter plus Rumbleweed or Jubilation will give all of your elementals infinite power. Nice. One thing you need to be very careful of is not decking yourself. I had a situation where I had 3 card draw pieces in play, so playing any elemental was going to draw me 6 cards. Add to this that many of the elementals that we play draw us more cards, like Regal Force, which happened to draw me 16 cards plus the 6 I drew from the draw engines, means you need to balance drawing versus casting. In that instance, I still managed to win before I decked myself, but ended up with 6 cards left in my library. Luckily, Avenger of Zendikar, Belonging, plus Jubilation and Sunderflock secured the win. Having sources of protection early in the game is very, very important, because if we start our combo uninterrupted, we will likely draw into more protection, but most people can and should stop us before we come online. As an extension of this, don't play Ashling too early in the game and only play her when you want to start evoking. That may be when you only have 1 cost reducer in play, which is absolutely fine, but don't play her randomly between turns 2 and 4 because she'll often catch stray removal or a board wipe. It's important to note that one of our biggest weaknesses with this deck is targeted removal, and particularly counter magic, because a lot of our protection, especially in the budget version, doesn't stop counter magic. It's for this reason that despite a fairly high ceiling, I think we're often going to be kept humble as long as our playgroup plays a responsible amount of removal. I think this deck is best placed right now in bracket 3, as it can reliably win by about turn 7, provided that like any combo deck, we draw our required combo pieces, and we need 3 of them to activate our 4-card combo in line with our commander. I think the deck can also play in bracket 2, but you have to pilot it incredibly responsibly and have to make sure the people you're playing with understand exactly what your win conditions are and what to destroy with their removal. Another weakness is that we're running very little board wipes or targeted removal, and that is simply because our plan is to combo and win, and to do that before we die to a horde of opposing creatures. We are not here to manage the board, in part because doing the thing requires all the space available in our deck. With more tinkering, we could maybe cut down on some of the card draw sources and an elemental or 2, and fit in 5 to 6 spot removal spells, but I feel like that's going to be weakening the deck simply so that we can occasionally cast the Beast Within, so that it feels like we're having an impact pre-combo. If you desperately want a version of this deck with removal, let me know and I'll put one together. There are going to be 2 deck lists down in the description, one that's sub $200 and one that's more. If you like the look of this deck, I have good news because I'm giving away a deck that's very close to the budget list, and if you want to win it, the details are pinned down in the comments. To land this plane with too many goddamn elementals on it, here is a good example of a goldfish to show you how I pilot the deck. I'm going to use an example from the budget list, but the lists are almost identical with about 90% of the non-land cards being shared across the 2 lists. The major difference is a cheaper mana base. Our opening hand is a solid one. We have no ramp, but we have all of our colors, no tap lands, and both a source of protection and tutoring. Our deck is capable of winning with only 4 mana in play, because all of the spells that we need to cast to actually win the game cost 3 to 4 mana, and we can cast them incrementally across turns, so a hand like this gets us there. Noting that if we're casting something like Goreclaw, we need to ideally have 2 mana up to protect him, so that's 6 mana, but you get the idea. On turn 1, we draw a land and play a land. On turn 2, we draw Krosan Drover, one of our combo pieces, and we play the Fauna Shaman. On turn 3, we draw an Interdisciplinary Mascot, and we activate our Fauna Shaman, discarding the Metamorph and fetching a Gwenna. We now just need a source of card draw, and we've assembled our combo. On turn 4, we draw a land, play it, and play Gwenna, with mana up for either a tutor or, more importantly, to protect Gwenna. On turn 5, we draw Souls of the Harvest, and now we are cooking with gas. We use Gwenna for mana and play Krosan Drover, holding up mana for protection. On turn 6, we draw a Graveshifter, play Ashling, and can now attempt to win the game. How this works is we play the Soul of the Harvest, we then play a Mascot, which can grab us a Sunderflock, and say another protection spell. We only really care about elementals at this point though, because if we're not stopped yet, we're probably just winning. We play the Grave Sifter and return all of our elementals to our hand from our graveyard, including the Grave Sifter. We play the Souls of the Harvest, and well, I think you can see where this is going to end up. This is a good opportunity to call out how much we benefit from having non-legendary elementals like the Mascot. From this point on, we've got a Jubilation in hand, as well as a Champion of the Path, and a Sunderflock. So we can either win through burn, or swinging with a bunch of angry elementals, or we can dig for a Maelstrom Wanderer, but it's probably not needed. Damn, it's a good day to be an elemental. And that's it. A lot, but I hope that you, dear base viewer, have found this useful. I'd love to hear your takes on any cards that you think would fit this list that I might have missed, or how you have built Ashling, either down in the comments or on the Base Deck Department Discord. If you want to support what I do, smash up the like button or head over to my Patreon. And a big thank you to everyone that supports me over there. If you want some more personal tailored help, or you're just horribly rich and want to jettison some money, you can find that over on Ko-fi, all of which you can find the links to down below the like button. A reminder about the giveaway that's down in the pinned comment, and if you like this, go and watch one of these other deck building videos, and as always, thank you for being here.